Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade that may or may not need an enema. Sorry, I couldn't resist. So if that terrible joke and the display behind me was not obvious enough, I am of course going to be talking about the newly released hardcover collected edition of the really just beyond fascinating Batman 89 comic that was started really about a year ago and was a great surprise, part of a sort of double package that DC was doing of both the Batman 89 sort of sequel comic idea to the classic two films, they're sort of referred to as the Tim Burton verse, since they were both obviously directed by Tim Burton, starring Michael Keaton in the same sort of continuity, and the simultaneous publishing of the Superman 78 series based on the classic Richard Donner, Christopher Reeve films, starting with the original 1978 film. So, as a fan of all of these films, and particularly of the Batman films and their production history and the various drafts and the writers involved, that naturally piqued my interest, shall we say, which was already extreme. This is merely just a few of the 89 pieces I have behind me to sort of rig up a display as I usually do. But I did pick up the first issue. I'm not a giant comic reader. I dabble in comics, is how I always put it. I usually read trade collections and things, but I was so excited for this that I did pick up the first issue or two, but because it was taking so long, I decided to wait to finish the series and get the collected version, which I do recommend because it's a really nice hardcover edition with a really nice cover, and it has the nice bonuses, but also one in particular that I think all of us who have picked up the hardcover are really happy with in terms of the packaging. But I think the collection is so nice that I would recommend picking up this only hardcover instead of the individual issues. So what is the Batman 89 comic? Well, essentially it is sort of using the two Tim Burton directed films as a jumping off point to tell really a further story in that same universe. That was the real approach and the idea, and that in and of itself would have been a fun and interesting comic. And of course the art by Joe Quinones is very much a love letter to the films and is accurately doing a really wonderful job, I would say, at recapturing the spirit, the flavor of the Burton films and the iconography of not just 89 with its Anton Furst design, but also Returns with the designs by Bo Welch in terms of the production design. And that means also doing the same characters and costumes. So you will see the Batsuit have bits of both the 89 Batsuit and Returns, and Bruce Wayne is very much obviously modeled on Michael Keaton. Catwoman appears in the sort of Returns type of costume, very much modeled after Michelle Pfeiffer, and they even have Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent, and this is where we get the sort of interesting what if we always wondered about, because it was always meant for Billy D. Williams to eventually play Harvey becoming Two-Face, and that was why he really signed up for 89, and we never got to see him do Two-Face, not counting finally him getting to do it in the Lego Batman movie as sort of a cameo. But it's sort of getting to do these untapped ideas, and you get the added benefit of all the characters looking very similar to the original actors. We even get Michael Goff's Alfred returning, and Commissioner Gordon does look quite a bit like Pat Hingle. So I guess they had to go and get the likeness rights, unless there was some sort of perpetuity deal with the original 89 film. But that was a really nice thing. A lot of times when you get comics sort of dabbling in this idea or any sort of visual medium, it's not always that they're going to have the likenesses. So I figured it was probably going to be just nods. I didn't know going in that they were going to have basically have the likenesses and have them done so well that they felt natural to sort of telling a third story in the Tim Burton Batman universe. So it does feel visually very much grounded in the two films, with again bits of the production design elements of both, because they are very different. Even though they have the same key players returning, they do have different visual identities. So I think it was a nice fusion of the two, and it never felt like there was too much of the modern day creeping into the visual style. So that was a really nice thing to see, and it will make everyone who's a fan of the original two Batman films feel very much at home going in. So that is absolutely spot on. I think the art is definitely I mean, the whole book is a love letter to the two films, but the art in every single panel is very much that. And I most especially loved seeing the sort of rendering of Keaton as Bruce Wayne and Batman in a slightly more advanced age. He's a little bit even not wizened, but he's a little bit older. He's a little bit more not necessarily, I guess, thoughtful here and there. There's a little touch of gray around the temples, which I thought was a really nice touch. So it is definitely playing up that he is getting older and maybe a little bit more bitter, and it fits in perfectly with the story. So I really appreciated the little details like that. There are also many, many Easter eggs and references hidden everywhere to both films and all kinds of bits of Batman lore. So if you want to, you can pore over every panel and look for more, because you'll see some. There's an amusing Prince nod, I think, in the first book. That's quite nice, right there in your face, and wonderfully done. But there's also nods to other bits of Batman lore, not just the Burton films, scattered throughout. So it's a fun little thing to do if you want to try and find all the Easter eggs. And again, the whole book is a love letter to the two films. So that's one reason why it's a must for any fan of the films. But that's all fine. That would have been one thing, and I would have eventually read this at some point, but I probably wouldn't have immediately gone out and tried to get it day and date and then get the hardcover edition as soon as it came out. The key factor why I did all that and why it was so interesting and why I think this book is so important is DC went the extra step. I don't know how all this worked out, but somebody went to the extra step and said, hey, Sam Hamm's still around. Why not get him to write it? And that's what did it for me. So you have the original writer of Batman 89 coming back and writing the comic. And it's not just the fact that Sam Hamm is now writing Batman again. He did write some Batman comics. He basically came up with the character of Ducard. That is now a nice key part of Bruce's traveling the world, learning his skills, back history. But he really was the person who, really cracked the code, if you will, of getting Batman into a feasible film narrative. Before Sam Hamm and with his collaboration with Tim Burton on getting the drafts of the script knocked out. Before that point, the only workable thing had been the Tom Mankiewicz script, which is still a great script, and it would have made for a great Batman movie. But it is very much in the sort of... It does have enough of the DNA of Superman the movie in it because, of course, you have the same writer. So it makes sense that Tom Mankiewicz's Batman script definitely had some similar vibes to his Superman scripts for Superman 1 and 2, which, of course, he didn't get credited for, which is a whole giant mess because he should have gotten credited for them. But anyway, that had been the only really good, solid script, and that's the one that was shopped around, and that's the one that got the initial greenlighting and stuff, but everything had sort of stagnated. And after that, no one had been able to crack how to translate the comics into a film narrative and do the darker, proper detective Batman and really get the core of the character on the screen. And Sam Hamm is really the person who did that. And I think the more you look at it, the more it becomes very obvious that a lot of the things people love in '89, and particularly those who are not big fans of Returns and they wish it had. You hear the common thing, that a lot of times people say they wish Returns felt more like '89. I think what they're responding to more is that '89 has more of a strong narrative drive throughout, and there is more of a mystery plot being told. It in the final film, it is changed in a number of ways because, of course, Sam Hamm was rewritten during the production by Warren Skaaren, and the tone was lightened up, and many little bits and bobs were changed and moved around. And it's a fascinating thing, if you've never done it, to read the available drafts that are floating around online, because Hamm's original drafts, including his ending, are much darker. And if you've never done that or you're not aware of that, I think it will be definitely a bit of an eye-opener going into this, because it's not quite just doing, this is an extension of the two movies and it's like it in the tone, but it's also quite a bit more gritty. And I think that very much is in keeping with the sort of differences between Hamm's original drafts and the production drafts, and then what Warren Skaaren rewrote. And it's also interesting to look at if you've ever read Hamm's original Batman 2 script that was not used for Returns, but one or two things sort of made its way over. It did have Penguin and Catwoman, but it did have a complete mystery at the core of its story. And if you look at those sort of bits and pieces, those sort of ideas, a lot of them do seem to come up here in the Batman 89 comics. So for somebody like me who's really geeked out for years on all the various bits of production history and the drafts and who wrote what and how they differed and what concepts were not used, and trying to imagine how that would have worked, how all the times they tried to get Robin to the films, they almost had him in 89, then they finally dropped him at the last minute because he was just sort of shoehorned in there. Robin was present in initial versions of Batman Returns and was sort of jettisoned getting close to the last minute. So ideas like that, it seems very natural for them to appear here in a different version, but with sort of, if you know the history of the production of the films and how the scripts developed, you can recognize the parallels. You can say, oh, well, this is kind of like coming from the Batman 2 script that wasn't used, and then so this is an interesting bit of getting Billy D. Williams' Harvey Dent from 89 to the point where he would become Two-Face. It's also using a lot of the side characters in a much better way in that Commissioner Gordon barely gets anything to do in the films, and so it's nice to see him have much more of an active role and a very believable one. We also get some other characters that never made it into the Burton films, most especially Barbara Gordon appears and has a nice active role, and she sort of, in a way, sort of takes the place of her father's character. He becomes more of a supporting player after he's sort of ousted from the police department, and so it's nice to see her and the sort of Sam Hamm vision and in the sort of Burtonverse. I don't know any other term other than Burtonverse. It's usually the given term for describing the two films, so I'll just stick with that. But it's fascinating seeing that, and also seeing how Sam Hamm writes Catwoman, because it is, obviously the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman from Returns, and this story is supposedly taking place after Returns, so we get the sort of what happened to Selina, and then when Selina and Bruce meet again for the first time really face-to-face after Returns. There's a little nice bit of dialogue about, I thought you were dead, like you should have looked for me harder. And it has this sort of inherent snark to it, which I really appreciated. That was sort of the some of the snark that you get in 89. So it had a bit of that flavor of the type of humor that was in the dialogue. So that was really nice. But it's not quite the same Selina Kyle from Batman Returns. This isn't Daniel Waters writing her. This is Sam Hamm writing her. So I think she has in this story a bit more of the darker flavor of the Selina Kyle Catwoman from his Batman 2 script, which again, if you've never read it, it is a great read. It would have made for a great film, but it's a much darker film with a great mystery to it. So it makes sense that him writing Catwoman would feel quite a bit like the Catwoman he wrote for the Batman 2 script that was not used, as opposed to feeling directly like the Batman Returns Catwoman we got. So in that sense, for me personally, that's probably the one thing I felt was a little... I get a little strange, I guess, because Sam Hamm wrote Batman 89 and then it was rewritten. It feels a bit weird having him write a story set after Returns as well. So in essence, it's going to feel a bit strange for people who just know the films and don't necessarily know the different styles of the writers, looking at much more serious, basically more of an 89 style take on some of the characters in the aftermath of Returns. And as I alluded to before, we get new material in this story. We do have a new version of Robin that is developed actually quite well and layered into the story quite nicely, which does have some of the aspects or some similarities to the Robin that was dropped from Returns. So that definitely isn't another of those sort of unused concepts sort of resurfacing here. And we obviously get the changeover of the Billy D. Williams Harvey Dent we saw in 89 into Two-Face, and it's a fascinating look at the sort of Sam Hamm version of Two-Face and getting the idea of what that iteration of Harvey Dent and what Billy Dee Williams might have done with the Two-Face character, the sort of what-if scenario we've always wondered about of Two-Face in the Tim Burton universe. So I must admit that was the primary draw of this whole project for me, was the idea of Sam Hamm coming back and not just writing Batman, but writing a follow-up story to the famous Tim Burton films. And what would he bring to Batman after all this time, and in particular the Batman that he sort of started with the '89 film. So it felt perfectly right that it wasn't just, you know, retelling the events of the films and being very linked to them, but having that sort of inherent grittiness of '89 with a great sort of mystery plot at its core, but that it also had the darker aspects of his drafts before they were rewritten for the final '89 film we got and know and love, and having elements of his unused Batman 2 script. So it felt that, combined with the art having such a loving quality for the original films, and the designs and the actors and actresses, and it just very much set in that same sort of headspace. It feels actually quite natural in terms of expanding the universe of those two films, but it will feel the two films are very distinct in terms of their identity, and a lot of that has to do with the two primary writers, Sam Hamm and Daniel Waters, having very different styles and tones, and they would be the first to admit that they're completely opposite from each other. And I love both films dearly. I think they're both masterpieces, of course, but it would be interesting to see if they ever got Daniel Waters to write a Batman comic, what that would be like, or if they continue this sort of project. I would love to see Daniel Waters writing Batman again, just to see what would happen. So that's sort of my general thoughts on the story. I don't want to spoil anything, because I think it's a story that all fans should go into cold, so that way you can enjoy it fully, and you'll want to go back and reread it several times to find all the Easter eggs and really appreciate the art. And again, the whole project is a love letter to the two Tim Burton films. It is to every last panel, and most rewarding, I think, is getting the original writer to come back. And there are several really nice moments and touches and flourishes that I really liked. A lot of things for diehards, and we once again get an explanation of the giant penny appearing in the Batcave, but we get the sort of Burtonverse explanation for it. So that was unexpected, but that was a really nice, fun little bit. But my absolute favorite thing in the entire book is the very last page of what was originally the final issue 6. So the last page of the entire story arc, the very final moment of what Bruce is doing, and how it's staged and written, I thought was just a sublime touch. So that alone sort of seals the deal of how much I really enjoyed this. So I think it's a must for all fans of the Tim Burton films, of course, especially for fans of '89 and its particular tone. And as, most of all, for those like me who have gotten into geeking out over the production histories and reading all of the script drafts of all the various Batman projects, whatever we can get our hands on, and sort of suss out what happened and try and figure out all the things that were not used, and do all the fun what-ifs of how could those have been spun off or developed into something else. This is the physical representation of all of that. So that's why I think it was so enjoyable to read and was such a worthwhile thing. And I think it is easily the most interesting and fun thing in terms of the entire Batman realm that I've experienced in a long time. And that includes all the stuff that Warner Brothers does with the feature division and all the various books and other comics. So this seemed like it had my name all over it, I must admit. So that's why I was so excited to finally get my hands on the collected hardcover edition. So here is the hardcover edition. The cover is the issue 1 cover. It's on a very, very nice premium glossy, the dust jacket is very glossy, so I'm having to hold it at an angle to not have it glare so much. But it looks really excellent. Again, I did pick up the first 2 issues of the actual comic, but I'm glad I waited to finish out the series with the hardcover. Here's another of the lovely covers as the rear, and this gives you the imagery of Catwoman reappearing, this story's version of Robin, Barbara Gordon, and the Billy D. Williams Harvey Two-Face, lovingly done there, and it feels just perfectly what you always imagined the Tim Burton Batman film with Two-Face we never got. That seems to be a perfect visual representation of, I think, what we all had in our sort of mental image. Then you open it, and the flap has the number 2 cover there, along with these lovely cloud end papers. And there is the title page. I will say, again, I'm not a comic expert, so please forgive me if my terminology isn't exactly correct. But you will notice that the actual paper stock is not glossy. It feels much more like the paper stock of a comic from the past. So I think it fits with the tone, style, artwork, and coloring to make it feel... I mean, I think it's really trying to feel like a comic from the 80s or late 80s, early 90s. So if you've ever handled a trade paperback from then, it will feel rather familiar. Of course, it is modern, but I think that just fits with the style. There's the first appearance of Catwoman in the story. This gives you an idea, I think, of how the artwork tries to carry the visual legacy of the 2 films while still inventing something of its own and still having bits and pieces of elements of the classical Bat mythos and paying tribute to other stories as well. So there are also plenty of Easter eggs for actual comics fans. There's a number of nods, obviously, to Dark Knight Returns here and there in year 1, as most things are going to have. So if you pay attention, there's a lot of other little Easter eggs to things outside the Burton films. And because it's the collected edition, you get a nice sketchbook of additional extras at the end of character concepts and models and trying to get the costumes down. But also, you get a wonderful alternative covers selection. And these are all really nicely done. And then I saved the best for last. None of us knew this until we got it, and I think this is something that everyone's commented on. The actual art on the printed hardcover itself is so perfect for this entire project and perfect for all of us because we're all at that certain age where we have nostalgia for growing up with the film. When you take the dust jacket off, you're not presented with a plain hardcover or an image of the cover or one of the covers used. You are instead presented with a replica recreation of the original VHS, right down to actually making a brand new custom label. Let me get this a little closer so you can see. And getting the credits on there, but with some age-related wear and stuff. When I saw this, and of course the back actually has the back of the cassette, and it opens where the book opens, and then on top of that, the actual side label is a handwritten, trying to look like a handwritten tape label, like you had made your own tape copy, taping it off of TV back in the day. This is so wonderful, and it's such a knowing little thing that... this could have easily been the actual cover, and I would have been ecstatic. So I love this so much. It's such a little thing, but it's not just that they made it look like a VHS tape of '89. They actually went to the small details. They actually looks like they scanned one of the tape labels because, of course, I have the tape with me still. And if you look... it is a very close representation of the original, right down to actually keeping the Warner Brothers terminology. So it's got their little digitally processed thing on there. It's got the closed captioning. It's got the Dolby Surround moniker, although it doesn't have the stereo moniker that was used when indicating it was Dolby Surround stereo. So it's not a perfect representation, but it's darn close. It took some effort. It wasn't just, let's make it look like the VHS tape and make something generic. I mean, they took some time to try and get it pretty darn close, and I like that they made a DC home video thing. It's a wonderful gag, and as soon as I got this and I decided to look at what was under the dust jacket, it was like, okay, these are my people. Thank you. So that was wonderful. The only thing is being me and the fact that I still run the Laserdisc all the time, I wish that there was a version that had the Laserdisc label. Maybe if they do a second one, we'll get the Laserdisc label generated for the for the sequel book. That would be really fun. But yeah, that's just, oh man, that's my favorite part of the whole package. And if you were to get any version of this, I do think the hardcover is the way to go. You can get it at your local comic shop, and it retails for $24.99. But I got it, and it was on sale for a little bit cheaper than that. So it's really nice, and I think this VHS design is the extra inducement for getting the collected version over the individual issues. I mean, this was a beautiful touch, so it's much appreciated. So that's my little sort of mini review and overview of the Batman 89 comic series in its fully collected hardcover edition. I do think this is a must for all fans of the classic Tim Burton directed films, all fans of Michael Keaton's Batman. This is a must. It fits tonally with what was originally established by Sam Hamm on his scripts for Batman 89. It draws quite a bit from the darker elements that were rewritten by Warren Skaaren, and also elements of his unused Batman 2 script that eventually would become Batman Returns. So it uses the films as a jumping off point, and it does feel like a natural extension of the sort of world that was built and the tone of the two films, even though they are very different. It does feel like a pretty natural growth from the two films. So I think it's a really nice natural sort of extension. And for those of us who always wanted a little bit more of the Burton verse, you wanted just a little bit more story, you wondered what happened afterwards, this is a perfect means to do so, and it's a love letter to the two films. I mean, you get that again. The art and design of every single panel is basically jumping up and down, screaming, "We love the Burton films!" So it's wonderful to get that sort of intensity of love and affection in the actual final product as well, and is very, very evident. So this is the most fun I've had with any sort of Batman material in a good number of years, and I will be coming back to it many, many times. And honestly, I think it's a brilliant idea to not only do a sort of, hey, let's do a comic continuation of the famous classic films, but let's actually get some original personnel involved. And again, when they announced this, I was like, okay, cool. And then I saw that they actually got Sam Hamm to write it. I'm like, okay, you have my money. that was the inducement factor. And but it took about a year for all the issues to come out, so I just decided to wait and finish the story, and by getting the collected hardcover, I couldn't resist for this one. And again, most places have it on sale off quite a bit off the list price, so it's a really nice collected hardcover, again with the beautiful VHS art, and it's quite inexpensive. So I am very curious to check out the sister Superman 78 series, because I've heard some good stuff about that too. Again, I hope they continue this idea. I would love to see Sam Hamm write more Batman, not necessarily having to be for 89, but just in general. And again, I think it would be fascinating to see if Daniel Waters would try his hand at writing some Batman comics as well. I think that would be fascinating. Of course, the two have completely different styles, and that's why the films are so different in terms of their tone. But I think it would be fascinating to see what he could do with a similar sort of approach of trying to continue the Burtonverse saga of the two Michael Keaton starring films. But in any case, this is a must. It was a lot of fun, and it did sort of indicate a lot of the what if ideas I've had over the years of what a third film could have been like, or what would it have been like had they actually shot Sam Hamm's Batman 2 script as Batman Returns, various bits and bobs like that, of the sort of fans wondering what if, and then finally getting some sort of physical representation of that what if. So that was really satisfying in terms of being able to read this. So I highly recommend this to all fans of the Tim Burton Batman films, Michael Keaton's Batman, really Batman in general. It's a really well done story arc. I really enjoyed it, and it's it's very inexpensive. You know, it's again, most places still have it on sale for under the list price, so I think the hardcover is the way to go. So that's my review of the Batman '89 collected version and my own general thoughts. As always, I hope my babbling about Batman has been at least somewhat fun and informative. Again, these are just general thoughts. I'm not an expert on any of this. I love Batman and I still dabble in comics, but I'm not a out and out avid comic collector. So these are more just general thoughts. And again, I had so much fun with this. I hope they continue because, you know, I don't know about you, but I could use what, six, yeah, six more would be good. You know, 6 more Batman '89 stories. But until we perhaps maybe get an announcement about having some more Batman '89 stories, or if this is just a one-off, pick up a copy for yourself and get nuts. And as always, thanks ever so much for watching.